3 blocks. That's how far Bumpy Johnson had to walk through hostile territory to reach Dutch Schultz's Bronx headquarters on October 2nd, 1935. 3 blocks where every corner could hide a hitman. Every doorway could conceal an ambush. Every window could frame a sniper. 3 blocks where 40 of Dutch's men were watching, waiting, hoping Bumpy would give them a reason. But Bumpy Johnson didn't bring a gun, didn't bring bodyguards, didn't bring backup. He walked those 3 blocks alone, unarmed, dressed in a gray suit like he was going to church. And when he walked through the door of Dutch Schultz's headquarters at the Harmony Social Club, 200 eyes stared at him. Dutch's entire organization, armed to the teeth, ready to kill, and Bumpy just smiled. What happened next would become legend in Harlem, a meeting that lasted 11 minutes but changed the course of organized crime in New York. A meeting where Bumpy Johnson looked Dutch Schultz in the eye and delivered an ultimatum so powerful, so terrifying, that Dutch never sent another man into Harlem again. This is the story of the boldest move in gangster history. The story of how one unarmed black man walked into the lion's den and walked out without a scratch. And the story of why Dutch Schultz, who'd survived wars with Mad Dog Call and Legs Diamond, was absolutely terrified of Bumpy Johnson. September 1935. The war between Dutch Schultz and Madame Stephanie St. Clair's Harlem Numbers operation had been raging for months. Bodies were piling up. Dutch had lost dozens of men. St. Clair's operation was under siege. And caught in the middle was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was 30 years old. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, he'd come to Harlem as a teenager and worked his way up to the criminal underworld. By 1935, he was Madame St. Clair's chief enforcer, her bodyguard, her strategist, and the man responsible for defending Harlem's numbers racket against Dutch Schultz's invasion. The war had started in early 1935. Dutch wanted control of Harlem's numbers game. It was generating millions of dollars every year. Poor folks betting nickels and dimes that added up to fortunes. Dutch had tried negotiating with St. Clair. She refused. So Dutch sent his men into Harlem, white gangsters demanding that black numbers runners work for him instead. Many complied out of fear, but Bumpy Johnson fought back. Hard. By September 1935, Bumpy had orchestrated the deaths of at least 40 of Dutch's men. Not all at once, not in big battles, but methodically, one at a time. Guerrilla warfare, as Bumpy's wife Mamie would later write. Picking off Dutch Schultz's men was easy, since there were few white men walking around Harlem during the day. They stood out, and Bumpy made sure they didn't stand for long. But Dutch wasn't backing down. He kept sending more men, more collectors, more enforcers. The war was bleeding both sides dry. And by late September 1935, Bumpy realized something had to change. On September 28, 1935, Bumpy made a decision. He was going to end this war, not with more violence, not with more bodies, but with a conversation, face to face, man to man. He was going to walk into Dutch Schultz's headquarters in the Bronx and deliver a message so clear, so final, that Dutch would have no choice but to listen. His associates thought he was insane. Illinois Gordon, Bumpy's closest friend and partner, tried to talk him out of it. You walk in there, they'll kill you. Dutch has 40 guys in that club at any given time. You won't make it out alive. Bumpy's response was simple. If Dutch wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. He's had dozens of opportunities. He hasn't taken them because he's afraid. Afraid of what will happen if he kills me. Afraid of how Harlem will respond. I'm not going there to fight. I'm going there to negotiate, from a position of strength. Madame St. Clair was equally concerned, but she trusted Bumpy's instincts. She'd seen him handle impossible situations before. If anyone could walk into Dutch Schultz's headquarters and walk out alive, it was Bumpy Johnson. October 2nd, 1935. Early afternoon. Bumpy Johnson took the subway from Harlem to the Bronx. He wore a gray three-piece suit, polished shoes, a fedora, no weapon, no knife, no brass knuckles, nothing. He walked from the subway station to East 169th Street, the Harmony Social Club, Dutch Schultz's headquarters. It was a 2-story building, brick facade, Small windows. One entrance. Inside, Dutch ran his entire empire. Bootlegging operations. Restaurant rackets. Numbers collections. Everything went through that building. And inside that building right now were at least 40 of Dutch's men. Bumpy stood across the street for a moment, watching, calculating. He saw 2 of Dutch's men standing outside the entrance. They saw him too. They recognized him immediately. Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd killed so many of their associates, the man Dutch wanted dead. And he was standing there, alone, in their territory. The 2 men reached for their weapons, but they didn't draw. They just watched, waiting to see what Bumpy would do. Bumpy crossed the street. He walked straight toward them. No hesitation, no fear. When he reached the entrance, he stopped. The 2 guards blocked his path. One of them spoke. "You lost, Johnson? This ain't Harlem." Bumpy's voice was calm. "I'm here to see Dutch. Tell him Bumpy Johnson wants to talk." The guards looked at each other. This had to be a trick, a setup. Nobody walks into enemy territory unarmed. But Bumpy just stood there, waiting. Finally, one guard went inside. The other stayed, hand on his pistol, eyes never leaving Bumpy. Inside the Harmony Social Club, Dutch Schultz was in his office on the 2nd floor, going over receipts with his accountant Otto Abadabba Berman. The guard came up the stairs. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. Bumpy Johnson is outside. He wants to talk to you." Dutch looked up. "What?" "He's outside. Right now. Alone. Says he wants to talk." Dutch stood up. He walked to the window and looked down. And there, standing on the sidewalk, calm as could be, was Bumpy Johnson. Dutch's first instinct was to have him killed. Right there. Right now. End this war in one moment. But something stopped him. Bumpy had walked into the Bronx, into Dutch's territory, into his headquarters, unarmed. That took either incredible stupidity or incredible confidence. And Dutch knew Bumpy Johnson wasn't stupid. Dutch made a decision. Let him in, bring him upstairs, but search him first, and keep guns on him the entire time. If he tries anything, kill him. The guard went back downstairs. He told Bumpy that Dutch would see him, but he had to be searched. Bumpy raised his arms. The guards patted him down. No weapons. No wires. Nothing. They looked at each other in disbelief. This man really walked in here unarmed. They led Bumpy inside. The main floor of the Harmony Social Club was a large open room. Pool tables, a bar, chairs and tables scattered around, and at least 30 of Dutch's men. They all stopped what they were doing and stared. Bumpy Johnson, in their headquarters, walking through like he owned the place. Bumpy didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge them, just followed the guards toward the stairs. On the 2nd floor, Dutch waited in his office. The door opened. Bumpy walked in. Behind him, 2 guards with drawn pistols. Dutch sat behind his desk. Otto Berman stood to the side. 3 more of Dutch's men stood against the walls. All armed, Bumpy was surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and completely calm. Dutch gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down." Bumpy sat. He crossed his legs. Relaxed, like he was visiting an old friend. Dutch stared at him. "You've got a lot of nerve walking in here." Bumpy's response was simple. "I've got a lot to say, and you're going to listen." The room went tense. Nobody talked to Dutch Schultz like that, especially not in his own headquarters. But Dutch was curious. "Say what you came to say. Then we'll see if you walk out of here alive." Bumpy leaned forward. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to pull all your men out of Harlem. Today, right now, you're going to stop collecting from our numbers runners. You're going to stop threatening our people. And you're going to stay in the Bronx." Dutch laughed, a loud mocking laugh. "Or what? You're going to kill me? You're sitting in my office, surrounded by my men. I could have you shot right now. Your body would be in the East River by tonight." Bumpy didn't flinch. "You could try. But here's what you're not understanding. I didn't come here to threaten you. I came here to offer you a way out, a way to save face, a way to end this war without losing everything." Dutch stopped laughing. "What are you talking about?" Bumpy's voice was steady. "You've lost 40 men in 6 months. 40. Every one of them killed in Harlem. Your men are terrified to go there. They know they're not coming back. You're spending more money trying to take Harlem than Harlem is worth. And for what? Pride? You can't win this war, Dutch. Not because you're weak, but because Harlem will never accept you. Every person in that neighborhood is against you. Every corner, every building, every family. You send 1 man in, we know about it in 5 minutes. You send 10 men in, we kill them in 20. You're fighting an entire community. And you're losing." Dutch's face was red, but he didn't interrupt. Bumpy continued. "I'm offering you peace, not surrender. Peace. You stay in the Bronx. Run your bootlegging. Run your restaurants. Make your millions up here. And we'll stay in Harlem. Run our numbers. Take care of our people. And nobody else has to die." Dutch leaned back in his chair. "And if I say no?" Bumpy's eyes went cold. "Then this war continues. And eventually I won't come here to talk. I'll come here to finish this. You think 40 dead men is bad? That's nothing. I've got 9 men. Just 9. And we've killed 40 of yours. Imagine what we could do if we really tried. Imagine waking up every morning not knowing if today is the day. Imagine looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Is that how you want to live?" The room was silent. Dutch's men shifted uncomfortably. They'd heard the stories. They'd lost friends. They knew Bumpy wasn't bluffing. Dutch Schultz made a calculation. He looked at Bumpy Johnson sitting there, unarmed, surrounded, but somehow more dangerous than anyone in the room. And Dutch realized something. This war was unwinnable. Not because Dutch didn't have the manpower, not because he didn't have the money, but because Bumpy Johnson had something Dutch didn't, the respect and support of an entire community. Dutch spoke quietly. "If I pull out of Harlem, how do I know you won't come after me here?" Bumpy's answer was immediate. "Because I don't want the Bronx. I don't want your bootlegging operation. I don't want your restaurants. I want Harlem. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone." Dutch thought for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fine. My men will be out of Harlem by tomorrow. But if any of your people cross into my territory, the deal is off." Bumpy stood up. "They won't. You have my word. And in Harlem, my word means something." Bumpy turned and walked toward the door. The guards moved to stop him. But Dutch raised his hand. "Let him go." Bumpy walked out of the office, down the stairs, through the main room where 30 armed men watched him pass, out the front door, into the Bronx afternoon. And he walked those 3 blocks back to the subway, alone, unarmed, untouched, because Dutch Schultz had just learned what everyone in Harlem already knew. You don't mess with Bumpy Johnson. October 3rd, 1935. The next day, true to his word, Dutch pulled his men out of Harlem. He sent word to all his collectors. Stay out of Harlem. Don't collect from those runners. Leave them alone. Some of his men were relieved. They'd been terrified of going into Harlem anyway. Others were angry. They felt like Dutch had surrendered. But Dutch didn't care. He'd made a strategic decision. Harlem wasn't worth the cost. Over the next 3 weeks, the war simply stopped. No more bodies. No more ambushes. No more violence. Harlem went back to running its own numbers operation. Dutch focused on the Bronx. And an uneasy peace settled over New York's criminal underworld. But here's what most people don't know. That meeting on October 2nd, 1935, wasn't just about ending a gang war. It was about respect. Bumpy Johnson had walked into Dutch Schultz's headquarters unarmed to prove a point. That he wasn't afraid. That he couldn't be intimidated. That Harlem stood behind him. And Dutch recognized that. Dutch had fought wars before. He'd survived Mad Dog Call. He'd outlasted Legs Diamond. But those were wars between gangsters. This was different. This was a war between a white mobster and an entire black community. And Dutch understood that he couldn't win that kind of war. 3 weeks after that meeting, on October 23rd, 1935, Dutch Schultz was shot and killed at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. Killed by hitmen sent by Lucky Luciano. Not because of Bumpy Johnson, but because Dutch had tried to kill federal prosecutor Thomas Dewey against the mob commission's wishes. But here's the irony. If Dutch had lived, the peace with Bumpy would have held, because Dutch understood something after that meeting. Bumpy Johnson was the kind of man you made deals with, not the kind you fought. After Dutch's death, Bumpy negotiated directly with Lucky Luciano. They made a formal agreement. Bumpy could run Harlem's numbers racket. In exchange, he'd give a percentage to Luciano's organization. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. And for the first time in history, a black gangster had negotiated as an equal with the Italian mob. Bumpy's wife, Mamie, wrote about this period in her memoir. She said, "It wasn't a perfect solution, and not everyone was happy, but at the same time the people of Harlem realized Bumpy had ended the war with no further losses and had negotiated a peace with honor. And they realized that for the first time a black man had stood up to the white mob instead of just bowing down and going along to get along. That walk into Dutch Schultz's headquarters became legendary. People in Harlem talked about it for decades. How Bumpy Johnson walked 3 blocks through enemy territory. How he walked into a building full of armed men. How he sat across from Dutch Schultz, surrounded and outnumbered, and negotiated peace. All without a weapon. All on the strength of his reputation and his courage. Years later, a young hustler in Harlem asked an old-timer what made Bumpy Johnson so dangerous. The old-timer thought about it. Then he told the story of October 2nd, 1935. He said, "Bumpy walked into Dutch Schultz's headquarters unarmed. You understand what that means? That means he knew Dutch couldn't kill him, not because Dutch was weak, but because killing Bumpy would have cost Dutch everything. Every person in Harlem would have come after Dutch. Every corner, every building, every family. Dutch would have had to fight a war he couldn't win. Bumpy knew that, and Dutch knew that. So Bumpy walked in there to prove it, to show Dutch that Harlem was untouchable. That's what made Bumpy dangerous. Not guns, not violence, but understanding power, real power." The old-timer finished his story, and the young hustler never forgot it, because that's how legends are made, not in shootouts, not in battles, but in moments of pure courage, moments when one man faces overwhelming odds and doesn't blink, moments when fear should rule but doesn't. October 2nd, 1935, Bumpy Johnson walked into Dutch Schultz's Bronx headquarters, unarmed, surrounded, outnumbered, and he walked out with peace. Dutch Schultz never tried Harlem again, not because he couldn't, but because he finally understood. Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson, and some things can't be taken by force. Look, the story of Bumpy Johnson walking into Dutch Schultz's headquarters is more than just a gangster tale. It's a story about power, real power, not the power that comes from guns or money, but the power that comes from respect, from community, from knowing who you are and what you represent. Dutch Schultz had money. He had men. He had guns. He had political connections. He had everything a gangster could want. But he didn't have what Bumpy had. He didn't have the unwavering support of an entire neighborhood. He didn't have people who would fight for him not because they were paid to, but because they believed in him. That's why Bumpy could walk into Dutch's headquarters unarmed, because he knew that if Dutch killed him, Harlem would burn the Bronx to the ground. Not metaphorically, literally. Every person in Harlem would have come after Dutch, and Dutch understood that. So when Bumpy sat down and offered peace, Dutch took it, not because he was weak, but because he was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. The meeting lasted 11 minutes, but those 11 minutes ended a war that had killed dozens of people. Those 11 minutes established Bumpy Johnson as a power broker in New York's criminal underworld. Those 11 minutes proved that a black gangster could negotiate as an equal with white mob bosses. And those 11 minutes created a legend that would last for generations. If this story about Bumpy Johnson's boldest move got your attention, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're dropping true crime history stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have had the courage to walk into enemy territory unarmed? Could you have negotiated peace the way Bumpy did? And turn on notifications, because next week we're telling the story of how Dutch Schultz tried to kill federal prosecutor Thomas Dewey and why the mob decided Dutch had to die for it. Remember, in the world of 1930s organized crime, respect meant everything. Power meant everything. And sometimes, the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun. It was courage. October 2nd, 1935. 3 blocks. 40 armed men. 1 unarmed man. 11 minutes. And a war that ended not with bullets, but with words. Bumpy Johnson walked into Dutch Schultz's headquarters. And Dutch Schultz never tried Harlem again.